Imagine for a second that you are told your brain, the most energy-demanding organ in your body, the thing that consumes 20% of your daily calories just to keep your heart beating and your thoughts moving, requires exactly 0 grams of dietary sugar to survive for months at a time. To the average person today, that sounds like a medical impossibility, or perhaps a recipe for a coma. We are taught from childhood that the brain runs on glucose, and that without a steady supply of carbohydrates every few hours, our systems will start to shut down. We feel the hangry irritability, the shaking hands, and the brain fog, and we assume these are the warning lights of a dying engine. But it is a paradox. If your ancestors actually required a constant, external supply of glucose to maintain their cognitive function, you wouldn't be here to wonder about it. A species that loses its ability to think clearly the moment it misses a lunch break is a species that would have been wiped out by the first dry season or the first unsuccessful hunt 200,000 years ago. You are the descendant of people who were at their most lethal, most creative, and most focused precisely when their stomachs were empty. We have spent the last century trying to extinguish the sensation of hunger, treating it like a fire that needs to be put out, without realizing that by doing so, we are also blowing out the very pilot light that keeps our biological machinery running at peak performance. That pilot light is a metaphor for your metabolic flexibility, a dormant superpower that ancient humans kept burning every single day. For the vast majority of our history, hunger wasn't the enemy, it was the signal that the internal furnace was switching fuel sources. Today, we live in a world of constant caloric noise, where the furnace never switches because we never let the primary fuel run low. We have been conditioned to believe that 3 square meals a day is a biological necessity, but this is a myth born not of evolution, but of the factory floor. Before the Industrial Revolution, the concept of breakfast, as we know it, didn't really exist. In medieval Europe, eating early in the morning was often viewed with suspicion, a sign of the weak or the gluttonous who couldn't wait for the communal midday meal. Ancient Romans typically ate 1 large meal a day around noon, believing that eating more frequently was a form of physical indulgence that clouded the mind. The transition to the 3-meal-a-day structure was a social engineering project designed to synchronize human bodies with the rigid schedules of 19th-century machines. If a factory worker was going to stand at a loom for 12 hours, they needed to be fueled on a schedule that suited the owner, not their biology. We took a 300,000-year-old biological system and tried to turn it into a clock, and in the process, we began to fear the very sensation that once defined our resilience. We started treating the flickering of our internal pilot light as a sign of impending darkness, rather than a transition to a more efficient burn. The reason we feel so much distress when we miss a meal today has very little to do with actual energy depletion and everything to do with a hormone called ghrelin. Most people assume that hunger is a linear process, that if you don't eat, you just get hungrier and hungrier until you eventually starve. But science tells a completely different story. In 2006, researchers published a landmark study in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism that tracked the ghrelin levels of individuals undergoing a 33-hour fast. What they found was startling. Ghrelin, the so-called hunger hormone, does not rise steadily. It spikes in a pattern that perfectly matches your habitual meal times, and then even if you don't eat, it drops back down. If you usually eat lunch at noon, your ghrelin will peak at noon, sending a frantic signal to your brain that it's time for fuel. But if you ignore it, that signal disappears by 1 p.m. Your body hasn't magically found food, it has simply realized that the appointment for food has passed, and it switches its focus elsewhere. Ancient humans understood this rhythm intuitively. They knew that the gnawing in the stomach was a wave to be ridden, not a command to be obeyed. They were not slaves to the clock because their pilot light was capable of jumping from the kindling of a quick meal to the heavy logs of their own body fat. When we eat every 3 hours, we never let the ghrelin wave pass, and we never allow the pilot light to reach the fuel that actually matters. We stay trapped in the shallow end of our own energy reserves, terrified of a hormone that is essentially just a biological alarm clock we've set for the wrong time. This leads us to the fundamental misunderstanding of how the human engine actually works. We often think of our bodies like a car with a single gas tank. When the needle hits E, the car stops. But the human body is actually a sophisticated hybrid. We have a small tank of glucose, the sugar in our blood and the glycogen in our muscles and liver, and a massive, secondary tank of fat. Even a very lean person carries tens of thousands of calories worth of energy in their adipose tissue. The problem is that in the modern world, we have lost the switch that allows us to move from the small tank to the big one. This switch is insulin. When you eat, especially when you eat carbohydrates, your insulin levels rise to shuttle that energy into your cells. As long as insulin is high, the big tank of body fat is locked behind a metabolic vault door. You cannot burn fat while your insulin is elevated. Because we eat from the moment we wake up until the moment we go to sleep, our insulin never drops low enough to unlock the vault. We are essentially starving in a land of plenty, surrounded by stored energy we can't touch, feeling faint because we've run out of the 2 hours worth of sugar we just ate. Our ancestors lived with a pilot light that could melt through that vault door in a matter of hours. They spent large portions of their lives in a state of fat adaptation, where their brains were fueled by ketones, breakdown products of fat that are actually a more efficient and cleaner burning fuel than glucose. When the pilot light is burning ketones, the brain fog vanishes, and the hangry irritability is replaced by a strange, calm clarity. It was this clarity that allowed an ancient hunter to track a deer for 20 miles on an empty stomach without losing focus for a second. The sheer efficiency of this ancient system was brought to light in 2012 by anthropologist Herman Poncer, who conducted a forensic study on the Hadza people of Tanzania. The Hadza are one of the last remaining groups on Earth living a true hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They don't have refrigerators, they don't have grocery stores, and they don't have a breakfast, lunch, and dinner schedule. They move constantly, walking miles every day to forage and hunt. Poncer expected to find that the Hadza burned significantly more calories than the average sedentary American office worker. But the results were a massive blow to our understanding of metabolism. When he measured their total energy expenditure using doubly labeled water, the gold standard of metabolic research, he found that the Hadza and the office worker burned almost the same amount of energy per day. How could a man sitting in a cubicle burn as much as a man hunting lions? The answer lies in metabolic compensation. When the Hadza are in a fasted state, their bodies become incredibly efficient. Their pilot light doesn't just burn hotter, it burns smarter. The body dials down unnecessary inflammation, slows down cellular turnover that isn't urgent, and optimizes every movement. Their bodies treat energy as a precious resource to be managed, not a waste product to be dumped. This suggests that our modern fatigue isn't caused by a lack of calories. We have more calories than ever, but by the fact that our bodies have forgotten how to be efficient. We are burning through our kindling so fast that we're constantly crashing, while the Hadza's pilot light is managing a massive, slow-burning bonfire of internal reserves. But this efficiency hides an even deeper, darker secret about what happens when the stomach stays empty for longer than a few hours. If the pilot light is the metaphor for our energy, then autophagy is the metaphor for the maintenance crew that only shows up when the furnace is quiet. In 2016, the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded to Yoshinori Ohsumi for his discoveries concerning autophagy, a process whose name literally translates to self-eating. It sounds terrifying, but it is actually the most advanced cellular recycling program in the known universe. When you stop eating for a significant period, usually starting around the 14 to 16 hour mark, your body realizes that no new raw materials are coming in. Instead of panicking, it begins a systematic audit of its own cells. It identifies broken proteins, damaged mitochondria, and dysfunctional cellular components, and it breaks them down to use as spare parts or fuel. It is a deep cleaning of the biological house. Ancient humans, by virtue of their inconsistent food supply, were triggering autophagy constantly. Their pilot light was effectively cleaning the chimney as it burned. In the modern world, where we never stop adding wood to the fire, the maintenance crew never gets the signal to start working. We are accumulating cellular trash at an unprecedented rate, which many researchers now believe is a primary driver of neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, and premature aging. We have traded the temporary discomfort of hunger for the permanent accumulation of biological waste. We think we are being kind to ourselves by never being hungry, but we are actually denying ourselves the only opportunity they have to repair themselves. This brings us to the most counterintuitive part of the ancient human experience, the idea that hunger actually makes you smarter. We have all been told that we need brain food before a big test or a meeting, usually in the form of a sugary snack or a heavy meal. But if you look at the work of Mark Mattson, a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins University who spent decades studying the effects of fasting on the brain, the truth is the exact opposite. When the body enters a fasted state and the pilot light begins burning ketones, the brain produces more of a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Scientists often call BDNF miracle-grow for the brain. It stimulates the growth of new neurons and strengthens the connections between existing ones. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. If you are hungry and haven't found food, you don't need to be sleepy and dull, you need to be at your absolute smartest. You need to remember exactly where that berry bush was 3 months ago, or you need to outthink the predator that is also eyeing your prey. Hunger was the evolutionary, high-performance mode for the human mind. The pilot light of our ancestors didn't just keep them alive, it illuminated their intellect. When we are constantly full, our BDNF levels remain baseline. We are effectively keeping our brains in a soft state, never challenging them to reach that heightened level of cognitive clarity that only comes when the stakes are high and the stomach is empty. We have mistaken the lethargy of a food coma for the comfort of success, while our ancestors were using their hunger as a whetstone to sharpen their minds. But there is a threshold where this sharpened focus turns into something much more profound, a state that ancient cultures across the globe recognized and sought out. This wasn't just about survival, it was about a fundamental shift in how the human animal perceives reality. If you look at the vision quests of indigenous North American tribes, the long Lenten fasts of early Christianity, or the meditative fasting of Himalayan monks, you see a recurring theme: hunger as a gateway. When the body has fully transitioned into ketosis, and the pilot light is burning with a steady, blue flame, the noise of the physical body begins to quiet down. In 2013, a study by researchers at the University of Southern California showed that prolonged fasting, going 48 to 72 hours without food, can actually reboot the entire immune system, triggering the production of new white blood cells. But the participants also reported something else: a shift in mood and perception. After the initial hurdle of the first day, many people describe a feeling of euphoria, an almost eerie calm, and a sense of being tethered to the world in a different way. This is not a hallucination brought on by weakness, it is the body's ultimate survival mechanism. By dampening the emotional volatility associated with blood sugar swings, the body allows the individual to become a cold, calculating, and highly observant observer of their environment. Ancient humans didn't just know how to handle hunger, they knew how to use it as a tool for self-mastery. They understood that the man who could control his hunger was a man who could control his destiny. They saw the pilot light not as a warning of death, but as a beacon of discipline. So, why does this all matter to you, sitting in a world where food is never more than a few minutes away? It matters because we are currently living through a biological crisis that we have mislabeled as a lifestyle choice. We have become a species that is metabolically brittle. We have replaced the steady, powerful pilot light of our ancestors with a flickering, unreliable spark that requires constant feeding just to stay lit. Because we have lost our metabolic flexibility, we have lost our resilience. We see the rise of type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and chronic fatigue not as a failure to listen to our ancient hunger, but as inevitable diseases of aging. But the Hadza don't get these diseases. Our ancestors didn't get these diseases. They are the diseases of the always full. When we refuse to let the pilot light do its job, when we refuse to let the switch flip from the small tank to the big tank, we are essentially forcing our bodies to run on the wrong fuel at the wrong time, forever. We have created a world where the sensation of hunger is treated as a trauma, but the reality is that the absence of hunger is the real danger. The real emergency isn't the feeling in your stomach at 10 a.m. The emergency is the fact that your cells have forgotten how to clean themselves, your brain has forgotten how to grow, and your body has forgotten how to access the massive reserves of energy you are carrying around every single day. We have traded our ancient, sharpened edge for a soft, comfortable decline, and we call it progress. The big reveal, the thing that changes everything we think we know about our own bodies, is that hunger is not a depletion of resources. It is an activation of them. When you feel that first wave of hunger, your body isn't saying, "I'm dying." It's saying, "I'm ready." It is preparing to sharpen your senses, to repair your DNA, to recycle your old, broken cells, and to switch you over to a fuel source that is cleaner and more powerful than anything you can buy in a grocery store. Your ancestors knew this intuitively. They didn't fear the empty stomach because they knew it was the precursor to the clear mind. They didn't see the pilot light as a sign of scarcity, they saw it as the proof of their own power. We have been sold a version of health that requires us to be constantly consuming, but true health, the kind of health that allowed a human being to survive an ice age, is found in the spaces between meals. It is found in the moments when we stop being consumers and start being biological masterpieces. The next time you feel that gnawing sensation, instead of reaching for a snack to kill the feeling, imagine the pilot light. Imagine the maintenance crew arriving to clean your cells. Imagine your brain preparing to grow new connections. Imagine the vault of your stored energy finally clicking open. You are not a car running out of gas. You are a hybrid engine that is finally being allowed to use its most powerful battery. But here is the cold truth that most of us are not ready to hear. We like to think that we have conquered nature with our supermarkets and our delivery apps, that we have finally solved the problem of human hunger. But biology does not care about our comfort. Every time you eat to avoid the slightest hint of hunger, you are essentially telling your body that it is no longer necessary for it to be strong. You are training your cells to be lazy, your mitochondria to be inefficient, and your brain to be dependent. In our quest to eliminate the discomfort of our ancestors, we have created a version of the human body that is fundamentally atrophied. We are like an athlete who has spent 20 years sitting in a chair. The equipment is all there, but it no longer knows how to function under pressure. The pilot light hasn't gone out, but it has become so small and so weak that the slightest breeze of a missed meal feels like a life-threatening storm. We have built a civilization that is calorie-rich and resilience-poor, and the cost of that trade is being written in our medical records every single day. For 300,000 years, your ancestors thrived because they were comfortable with the empty space. They knew that the information provided by hunger was more valuable than the distraction provided by a constant feast. They lived in harmony with their own biological rhythms, riding the waves of ghrelin and insulin like master sailors on a metabolic sea. They didn't need a study from the Salk Institute or a Nobel-winning researcher to tell them that their bodies were designed for the challenge. They felt it in the sharpness of their vision during a long hunt and the deep, restorative sleep that follows a day of productive fasting. They were the masters of their internal pilot light. We, on the other hand, have become the servants of our own appetites. We have mistaken the noise of our habits for the needs of our cells, and in doing so, we have lost the very thing that made us human. We are the first generation in the history of our species to be more likely to die from having too much food than from having too little, and yet we are the most terrified of being hungry. Think back to that paradox from the beginning, the brain that needs 0 grams of dietary sugar to function for months. That isn't a theory. It is a hard, biological fact of your existence. You are currently carrying the survival equipment of a high-performance hunter-gatherer inside the body of a 21st century consumer. The equipment is waiting. The big tank is full. The maintenance crew is standing by with their tools, waiting for the furnace to go quiet so they can finally start the repairs you've been delaying for years. All it takes to activate that ancient system is the one thing we have been taught to avoid at all costs: waiting. It is the simple act of letting the pilot light burn through the kindling and reach the logs. It is the willingness to be uncomfortable for an hour so that you can be powerful for a lifetime. But most of us will never do it. Most of us will continue to treat every stomach growl like a 5-alarm fire, never realizing that we are burning down the house just to stop the smoke alarm from beeping. We have forgotten the language of our own bodies, and we have replaced it with the marketing slogans of people who profit from our hunger. The uncomfortable reality is that you are likely more metabolically fragile than your ancestors were at their lowest point. You have plenty of fuel, but you have lost the ability to use it. You have plenty of food, but your cells are starving for the repair that only comes with scarcity. You are living in a body that was designed for the hunt, but you are treating it like a greenhouse plant. The pilot light is still there, flickering in the back of your metabolism, waiting for you to give it a reason to roar. But as long as you keep the furnace stuffed with cheap, easy kindling, that blue flame of resilience will stay small, weak, and hidden. You aren't hungry in the way your ancestors were, you are just addicted to the cycle of the next meal. And until you break that cycle, you will never truly know what your body is capable of. You will never feel the ketone-fueled clarity, the autophagy-driven repair, or the BDNF-induced focus that is your birthright. You will stay in the shallow end, forever afraid of the deep water that actually holds the prize. Here is the cold, undeniable fact that should shatter your comfort. You are currently living in the most well-fed period in human history, yet you are likely the most biologically fragile version of a human that has ever existed. Your ancestors could go days without food and become more capable, while you miss one lunch and your blood sugar crashes so hard you can barely think. That isn't health, and it isn't normal evolution, it is metabolic atrophy. You have traded your ancient, sharpened resilience for a life of constant, low-level inflammation and cellular decay, all because you've been told that hunger is a problem to be solved rather than a process to be respected. The pilot light of your ancestors was a beacon of survival, but yours has become a warning light you've learned to ignore. And the longer you ignore it, the more your internal machinery rusts away in the dark. Your body is screaming for the clarity of the empty space, but you keep drowning it in the noise of the next meal. The choice to finally listen is yours, but remember, the maintenance crew can only work when the furnace is off, and for most of you, that furnace hasn't been quiet for years.